Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, the episode we're bringing you today, we're not bringing you the way that I expected to. Today, we're going to look at a collection of Confederate manufactured and used revolvers and get a look at some of the small arms used in the Confederacy during the war. We had originally intended to tell you that this was a private collection and the collector wished to remain anonymous. I can sadly now say that this collection came from our friend Matt Woodburn, who passed away at the end of 2020. Matt was a wonderful collector and living historian and a great friend to many of us, and me in particular. Matt and I were talking less than a month before he passed about this episode and about future episodes and more stuff out of his great collection that we could bring to you. Alas, those stories will wait for another time with another collector, but we're really proud that we got time with Matt, and personally, I loved any time I could get with my friend in a couple of days in his collection, shooting the 4 episodes, this being the 4th. Just wonderful time spent. In Matt's honor, let's go look at his collection of Confederate revolvers and see what we can learn.
In the last conversation I had with Matt, we were discussing this episode. He explained to me that one big goal of building this part of the collection was to explore as many technological variants in handgun production during the war era as possible. We will see this as we explore the 17 pieces that make up our episode. As we look at this wonderful collection today, we will break it up into 2 distinct parts. First, we will look at handguns which were produced by European sources and then imported to the American continent. Some of them came during the war years, others we believe were antebellum. After that, we will turn to handguns produced here, whether in the Confederacy or purchased pre-war or wartime captured. Our exploration of foreign-produced weapons will begin in England, and it will be a family affair. We will look at 3 handguns that were made by the Adams and Kerr family. Robert Adams was an English gunsmith born in Devonshire in 1810. In 1851, he patented a spurless hammered, double-action, .436 caliber, 5-shot revolver. The first model was produced in partnership with John and George Dean, also weapons makers. The first handgun we show out of the collection is this model. It is marked on the side Hayden Goodrich, 18 Chartres Street, New Orleans, which was an importing firm in business from 1828 to 1861. The original Hayden Goodrich store was located on Chartres Street by 1828, but moved to the corner of Canal and Royal Streets in 1853. Given the dates they were in business, there is a good chance this weapon was on the continent before the war broke out. This pistol style was so popular it was produced under license, such as by Perlot Brothers in Liege, Belgium. This version shows a patent number of 8894 and is marked Dean, Adams & Dean, London. On the left side, it's marked Adams Patent 1851. Around 1856, Adams left his partnership with the Deans and formed another family-based company. In this case, he and his cousin, gunsmith James Kerr, formed London Armory Company. Previously, Kerr had been a factory foreman with the Dean brothers. In 1859, Adams left the company due to its desire to focus more on infantry rifles. These variants on the P-53 Enfield rifled musket were the famous Kerr rifles, used by Confederate sharpshooters like Cleburne's division sharpshooters. After Adams' departure from the London Armory Company, Kerr and his team designed the Kerr revolver. We have an example of that in this collection. It is shown with the patent number 3340. The factory produced this weapon in 36 and 44 caliber, and our example appears in 44 caliber. You will notice the words London Armory engraved into the metal on the butt. Also, LAC is engraved in the weapon. This handgun is identified to Azariah Gwynn. He was a private in Company I, 26th North Carolina Infantry. They were part of Rhodes Brigade in the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia. Confederate purchasing agents Major Caleb Hughes and Captain James D. Bullock bought upwards of 7,000 of the 11,000 Kerr revolvers produced. The London Armory Company went out of business in 1866. As we continue looking at British-made weapons, we meet the Tranter. Mr. Tranter was a gunsmith from Birmingham who originally produced Adams-style revolvers under a license. In 1853, he began producing a revolver of his own design. This used a unique-looking double trigger. As Matt paid attention to technological differences, this is a pretty big deal. As you look at it, the lower trigger cocks the hammer, and then the trigger in the guard fires it. Like the Adams and Carr revolvers, it used a single-frame design, which was stronger than the wedge-frame design of the Colt revolvers. In addition, the ramrod used to load the revolver from the front is very interesting compared to American-produced models. The ramrod is marked with Tranter's patent. The trigger also bears the same marking. Originally, this weapon was produced in a variety of calibers from .32 all the way up to .577. Remember, that's the caliber of the Enfield rifled musket. A.B. Griswold and Company and Haydn Goodrich of New Orleans imported the weapons, both before the war and for the Confederacy. You will remember that Haydn Goodrich also imported the 1851 Adams that we showed first today. Two notable personalities who were known to carry the Tranter were Alan Pinkerton and Jeb Stuart. Our final British-made weapon today is the Webley wedge frame. This was designed by Philip Webley, another gunmaker from Birmingham, and Joseph Bentley. It was a less expensive model of pistol than the Tranter or Adams. Built on the same principle as a Colt revolver, it has a two-piece frame held together by a wedge. It is 5-shot and can be fired either single or double action. The example we see here is marked with patent number 1106 and has a very interesting dovetail attaching the front sight. The loading lever is also quite interesting. It is marked with J. Adams London across the strap over the cylinder. It is interesting to note that J. Adams is John Adams, variously noted as either brother or cousin of Robert Adams of the London Armory Company. Despite the family connection, we have found no business connection between these two. As we leave the British Isles, we move over to Belgium. The first example we will look at is the LeFaucheaux. Although named for its French designer Casimir LeFaucheaux, it was produced in Belgium. This handgun was developed in the 1850s and produced under a patent by Casimir's son Eugene. We do not know why the son did production and the father inventing, but we find no indication of any animosity between the two of them. Matt described it to us as a model 1854. We see it has the serial number 42996. It is also marked JMVF Brevet. When looking at weapons technology, this example uses a Pinfire cartridge. That means it had a primer pin coming out the side. It is chambered in 12 mm, which is roughly .47 caliber. The next revolver has been a bit of a challenge for us as we prepare this episode. Matt described it as a Belgian Pinfire. You can see that the primer comes out the side of the cylinder. Beyond that, we have had a hard time finding any documentation or identification for the piece. If you have any ideas or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you either via email or in the comments below on this video. Our last foreign-produced weapon is also the beginning of our discussion of American production for the Confederacy. Arguably one of the most well-known revolvers of the Civil War is the LeMat. It was designed by inventor Jean-Alexandre LeMat of New Orleans in 1856. This easily recognizable handgun is a revolver with two barrels. The upper barrel works off the outer chambers of the cylinder and comes in either .42 or .35 caliber. The lower barrel was a 20-gauge shotgun. The revolving portion held 9 rounds of the smaller caliber. Before the Civil War, 100 copies were produced by John Crider in Philadelphia. After secession, LeMat moved production to Belgium and France, where more than 2,900 copies were made. Of these, approximately 2,500 were shipped to the Confederacy through the English weapons market in Birmingham, England. The LeMat was known to be a favorite with many Confederate generals. Jeb Stuart, Braxton Bragg, P.G.T. Beauregard, and Richard Anderson were all known to carry it. We now turn to the part of Matt's collection that was American-produced. The first piece we see is the only handgun in the collection that is not a revolver. This is the U.S. Model 1842 Percussion pistol of the H. Aston contract. It was manufactured in Middleton, Connecticut in 1849. This was noted to us as one of the last single-shot horse pistols made for the U.S. Army. It is shown here in .54 caliber and had a smooth bore. Around 30,000 of these were produced. Beginning our look at revolvers produced in this continent, the only correct way to do this is to begin with the Colt. In Matt's collection, there are 3. All of them are identified, and this is a rich treasure. Working from earliest to latest chronologically by model number date, we begin with the Colt 1849 pocket. This is 31 caliber and functions in single action only. The cylinder has 5 chambers and the weapon is constructed with a 2-piece wedge frame. Made to be very light, it weighs in at only 26 ounces. When production ended in 1873, more than 325,000 had been produced. However, a serial number 280,000 or lower denotes wartime production or before. Our example carries serial number 211,975 and was the property of General Thomas B. Smith, the youngest brigadier general in the Army of Tennessee. This is part of Matt's grouping, which is his collection of artifacts carried by men who were at the Battle of Franklin. Smith's name is engraved on the brass backstrap. After serving at Franklin, he surrendered at Nashville and was severely beaten by his own sword by a Union officer after his surrender. This injury plagued him for the rest of his life. The next piece moving forward is the Colt Model 1851 Navy, which was produced in 36 caliber. This is a 6-shot, 36 caliber weapon. Even though it is larger than our previous example, weighing in at 2 pounds 6 ounces, it is about half the weight of previous military revolvers from Colt, namely the Walker and Dragoon. This made it much easier for a foot officer to carry, yet its larger caliber and room for gunpowder in the cylinder provided more stopping power than the pocket revolver. Matt's example is serial number 91,044. It is identified to Captain Thomas Gibson of Company H, 10th Tennessee Infantry on the Confederate side. We see an image here out of Matt's collection of Captain Gibson. He also served at the Battle of Franklin, and you can see his name engraved on the backstrap of the revolver. The final Colt revolver in the collection is the Colt Model 1860 Army. Colt used the frame of the 1851 Navy and scaled it up to the 44 caliber Colt Army revolver. The resulting product was powerful, yet light at only 2 pounds 7 ounces. This was one of the primary pistols of the Union Army during the war. We see serial number 93,172, which indicates production in 1863, so this is most likely a battlefield capture. We were told it is identified to W.J. Thomas of the 7th Tennessee Cavalry Company F. Our research shows him under Colonel Duckworth as part of Forrest Cavalry Corps. The final segment that this collection explores are revolvers produced in the Confederacy for use during the war. All Confederate-produced revolvers seen here were copies of existing weapons made in the North. The first example we see is a Spiller and Burr with a serial number of 1,118. The company that produced this was formed by Marylander Edwin Spiller and David Burr of Richmond, Virginia in 1861. The company was initially formed in Richmond, Virginia. Another partner in the company was Lieutenant Colonel James Burton, then Superintendent of Armories for the Confederacy. Prior to the war, Burton had invented the Burton bullet, the version of the mini ball that was used by both sides. Not long after the company was formed, production was moved to Atlanta, Georgia. Of course, this was not due to Union invasion, but rather to keep production close to where Burton was working. This example has the letter CS stamped in the brass frame in front of the cylinder on the right side. It is a 6-shot single-action revolver in 36 caliber. We know that it is a later example because only 1,200 to 1,500 were produced. Production was finally halted by Sherman's march to the sea. The next piece we look at is the Griswold and Gunnison. Samuel Griswold was an industrialist from Connecticut who settled in Georgia in about 1818. Once there, he established a cotton gin manufacturing firm in his own company town, Griswoldsville. Working with partner Arvin Gunnison, they began to make copies of the Model 1851 Colt Navy revolver in 1862. The firm was able to produce about 3,700 during the war. This is the most from any Confederate producer. The factory was destroyed on November 22, 1864, near the beginning of the March to the Sea. We are looking at serial number 1780. It has a brass front sight dovetailed into the front of the barrel. It is produced in 36 caliber and is a 6-shot single-action revolver. Our next piece is a 36 caliber 6-shot knockoff of the Model 1851 Colt Navy produced by Leech and Rigdon. Cotton trader Thomas Leech and scalemaker Charles Rigdon formed a company at the beginning of the war. Besides this company, Leech was also founder of the Memphis Novelty Works, which made swords for the Confederacy. We saw some of their work in the Confederate Swords and Sabers episode recently. The firm was originally established in Columbus, Mississippi before moving in December 1862 to Greensboro, Georgia. Their original contract called for 1,500 pieces to be produced. 1,000 or so copies were completed before Leech dissolved their partnership. This copy is serial number 1404, so certainly late in the production run. There is a mark on the grip. It is the letters W and H inside a diamond. The inspector was Wescombe Hudgens. As we look at the top of the barrel, we see the Leech and Rigdon stamp is not pristine. Matt told me this is a known issue in later serial numbers on the run. After the partnership with Thomas Leech dissolved, Charles Rigdon took the machinery to Augusta, Georgia. There, he produced the last 500 pieces owed in the original contract of Leech and Rigdon, and then just under 1,000 of the Rigdon and Ansley type. The next revolver is one of that later type. It is serial number 2038. Looking at the cylinder, we see 12 notches rather than 6. The additional notches between where the cones to hold the percussion caps are were made as places to set the hammer down on as a safety for the weapon. These later firearms were made on the same equipment as the Leech and Rigdon revolver because of the business change. It is considered by many to be one of the best produced Confederate weapons technically. There is a lot of wear to the finish in our copy. We speculated in a discussion with Matt that this might be what some people call holster wear, or wear on the weapon from drawing and putting it back into the holster during use. The final revolver in the collection is one that Matt was immensely proud to have in his collection. J.H. Dant and his 3 brothers had a machine shop in Columbia, Texas. This is south of Houston. They began making copies of the Colt Dragoon revolver in 1862, as well as copies of the Model 1851 Navy. The output was anemic at best, with only 325 to 500 copies of both models being constructed. The majority of these pieces were the Dragoon model, which we see here. The copy in this collection is serial number 206 and is considered very rare. Making it even more rare is the fact that it is identified to a Dr. Wesley Weyerhaeusen.
Well, there's well over a dozen revolvers out of Matt's collection. In memorial to him, we're thrilled to share this with you. We've shared some other stories. Matt loved sharing history and helping you find a connection. We're glad this is part of his legacy. We'll see you again soon.